So we're going to talk about some nutrition and nutritional guidelines, food service, so how we feed various age groups, and then touch on some food safety and food handling issues as well. So we're going to go over some nutritional requirements for feeding children in different early childhood education programs. We're going to talk about providing nutritionally balanced meals, and we're specifically going to be using the guidelines and requirements from the Child Care and Adult Care Food Program, which is often called the CACFP. I'm going to just call it the food program for the rest of these PowerPoints. Then we'll talk about feeding infants, toddlers, preschool age children, school age children, mixed age in our family child care centers, and then some special issues. Then at the very end, we're going to talk about some licensing requirements for food handling and sanitation. So children are going to be at our programs long enough to require some kind of food. Snacks, meals, breakfast, lunch, or suppers. But how this is achieved really depends on the program that you're at. We've talked a lot about the wonderful diversity within our field, and this is just another iteration of how that diversity is put into practice in our programs. So if you're 100% USDA because you're Head Start, that's going to look very different than a part-day preschool program within a school district that is going to have their food subsidized by the food program, but the cafeteria is going to bring it to them. Or if you are in a before or after school program where you only provide substantial snacks after school, or you're a family child care where you provide 100% of the meal, or perhaps the parents bring in some kind of meals. So there's a lot of diversity in how we feed children. We just need to make sure that what we're providing is healthy and there's enough of it for all of the children in the program, and that we prepare it safely. So when we look at nutrition and nutritional guidelines, a good place to start is the USDA, which is the U.S. Department for Agriculture. They have dietary reference guidelines, which are just guidelines for nutritional values of food. So the actual nutrients that are in the foods, how many calories, vitamins, minerals, carbs, that types of things. So we can make informed choices about the foods that we're buying and putting into our bodies. And then they have dietary guidelines. And this looks at having an active lifestyle, moving your body, but also the quality of the nutrients that you choose for the calories that you have within a day. So we're not per se counting calories for the children in our program, but we need to make sure that of all the foods that we choose, we're choosing high quality foods that are going to meet their nutritional needs as they're growing. The food pyramid you probably have all seen, and then there's a more recent iteration of that called My Plate, which focuses more on the fruits and vegetables. And it's very easy to order if you go to choosemyplate.gov. They have high quality prints of these that you can order for your classroom or your family child care if you were planning on having some cooking demonstrations or making cooking and healthy living part of your curriculum. So we need to make sure that we're providing balanced meals. So that really means a balance of fruit, vegetables, complete proteins, because there are amino acids in proteins, and we need to make sure that we're offering complete proteins for younger children because their bodies are moving and growing and they need all of those complete amino acids. So if you are providing vegetarian meals at your center, which is your choice, you would just need to make sure that you are offering vegetarian options that are also complete proteins. So combining corns and beans, milk, and other products get you a complete protein. And then you also have your fats, your carbs, and then vitamins and minerals, the biggest one being calcium for our younger children who are growing their bones. I'm talking about offering water as well because on some of the policies that I've been reading that you guys have been writing, you were writing that teachers need to provide water on the playground, and I thought that was a really good point. It's been a very hot summer. It's probably only going to get hotter and hotter in the summers, and having water, milk, or 100% juice as our only options for drinks is a really good move. So also when you're looking to make balanced meals and balanced menu creation, you're checking the labels, and some of you will have your foods delivered to you or made for you by cafeterias or your food handling staff who is qualified and trained in how to do this, but if you are more on your own because you're an FCC provider or a small preschool, that you're going to check the labels when you initially go out to buy your food, and then at intervals afterwards to make sure that they still meet the requirements. Years ago, we were buying all of our food, and I did this with an admin assistant. We went twice a month to Costco, and we pushed giant crates around all day long trying to get the food for our programs. And we had been buying Juicy Juice, I believe. And at that point it was 100% juice. But it did change, and the stuff that we had already bought, we could no longer use for the children in our program. So especially if you're a smaller program with less controls in place to kind of check these types of things in your food handling and food buying systems, then you're going to need to check it on your own. And then also a trend within balanced meals is making sure that we have lower sugar and lower fat options to feed our children. And typically the best way to do this is by providing whole foods that make up for the majority of their sugar and for their fat. So not offering choices that have added sugars to them, which you would think of as our baked goods, cakes, cookies, lollipops, gummies, that type of things. And then also yogurts and other prepared foods often have a lot of added sugars, and they also have a lot of added fat. So if you were to choose more whole foods to make up for this, so their sugar coming from naturally occurring sources like fruits, and then their fats coming from nuts and seeds, added oils, avocados, that's going to be a better and more nutrient-dense choice for children. So I've just given you a whole bunch of information on nutritional requirements, but you could be, especially if you're starting out and running your own program, or you're newer to this, you might have questions on how can I make sure that my meals are healthy? How are they balanced? Do I know that there's enough for all of the children? And what does licensing think about this? Well, if you are using the food program, then all of those questions have been answered for you. They detail very specific requirements for age group, for meals, and for food groups that need to be provided. The licensing requirement is only that you provide enough quantity and it's for each child, and that it's of good quality. So if you use the food program, then you're meeting licensing requirements. But for programs that maybe can't participate in the food program because of income qualifications, or you just choose not to, I would still use the food program to make sure that you are providing enough quantity and enough quality for the children in your care. So I would print out, and you can just go online and you can look up the CACFP food charts, requirements, things like that, and you can print out a wide variety of their information and from their website, which is part of the USDA. This is going to make sure that you are providing enough and that it's high enough quality. This is a video called What is CACFP? And it's just going to talk to you about meal reimbursements and then serving nutritious meals and snacks for the children in your care. This is a good introductory video if you're not familiar with the food program and you'd like to know more about it, and if you're eligible, you can go to their website. If you do know what the food program is, but you're choosing not to participate or you can't participate, I still think it's a good idea to know their guidelines and to use them in order to make sure that you're serving enough nutritious food for the children in your care. So in the previous slides, we've gone over the USDA's requirements for food. We've talked about our food program and how that's a really good template for programs to use if they're looking to provide nutritious choices for the children in their program. Now we're going to just switch gears and we're going to look a little bit about how children are fed, because how they are fed is going to vary greatly by the program type and also by the age group that you serve. So with our infants, it might be providing a space for a mother who's breastfeeding to come at her lunchtime and nurse her baby. Or for our school age program, providing a nutritious and substantial snack after a long day of being at school. And then maybe for an FCC home, we're looking at having a bunch of different children with different age groups who might need to eat at different times, depending on if they need a routine or they need a feeding schedule. I'm also going to provide some guidelines for feeding different age groups through family style dining, which is really our industry standard on how children are fed. then a lot of my information is coming from Lynn Mart's Health, Safety, and Nutrition for the Young Child, which is a textbook that I used and is a great source for information about nutritional guidelines, eating behaviors, and how children are fed. And so I've included a table from her book about age-related eating behaviors and kind of types and foods of behaviors that children might show at the mealtime and what is age appropriate and typical for that age. Dive into feeding specific age groups, I wanted to have this video, which is family style meals in the childcare setting. And like I said before, family style is really our industry standard. Most of us are already doing this or we're training our staff in how to use this. But this would be a good reference for showing new staff, or sometimes classes do struggle with this, especially if there's challenging behaviors or if there's behaviors related around meal times that could be challenging. Sometimes staff believe that it's just much easier to just muscle through it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to cut it up. I'm going to pierce it with a fork. I'm going to pour your liquids. So this might be a good resource to reinvigorate your staff for providing the family style dining, which is really just kind of sitting down as a group, having conversations, talking with the children, and allowing them to practice the skills of feeding themselves age-appropriate wise. So younger toddlers are giving very small amounts of liquid in their cups in order to try pouring it, trying to pierce their own foods, whereas preschoolers and school agers have a bit more dexterity in their oral motor and their hand-eye coordination. So practicing those skills is a little bit easier, but talking, modeling manners, working together as a team with cooperation, those become more of the issues. So this video might be a good resource for new staff who are new to family style dining, or for classrooms that just need some re-education. So feeding our babies and our infants. So infants need that emotional bond and that connection with a human as much or more so than they need the actual milk or formula. You know, we've all heard of the experiment with the little monkey, and she can get milk from a wire monkey mama, or she can get nothing from a soft milk mommy or soft carpeted mommy monkey, and they always choose the soft one that mimics giving them a hug or something like that. So infants need to be held. They shouldn't be propped up with bottles in their mouth or allowed to walk around with a bottle. They need to be held, or they need to be sat close to someone while being fed purees or finger foods. So for the first 6 months, it should be milk only. Pumped breast milk, making a space for mom to come in and nurse, or for formula. I want to talk a little bit about providing spaces for moms to feed. As somebody who just wrapped up a year of nursing her own daughter, breastfeeding and pumping becomes kind of a part-time job for you. Every day before I left for work, it was getting my pump ready, getting all my bottles ready, getting my baggies ready, getting enough snacks and water so that I could do that for my daughter all day long. It was a real act of love that I did for her while I was working, that I was able to do that for her. So making a space and honoring the choice that she has to breastfeed her child is really important. But at the same time, fed is best. So I try not, when I'm in the classroom, to put any kind of value judgments on how parents choose to feed their children, as long as it's nutritionally appropriate for them. So for some people, that's formula only. For some, that's breast milk. And for a lot of people, that's combinations of both if they aren't able to produce enough breast milk. And then once we actually are providing the milk, there shouldn't be any additives added to the milk unless it's indicated by a doctor. So a lot of times people will think that if they can get enough calories into the milk, the children will be happier or more satisfied and willing to sleep. So they'll add cereals and other additives to their milk. And this really shouldn't be done unless it's indicated by a doctor. And typically I would ask for the doctor's note if I was supposed to be adding anything to it. There are certain special needs and reflux issues where that might need to happen, and I just need to see that doctor's note in order to do that. And then my background as a special needs educator is going to come into play a little bit about this. A lot of times doctors will just say 6 months, stick a puree in their mouth. For me, as someone who's worked with occupational therapists and sees oral motor therapies happening all the time, my guidelines for children getting purees is that they have the ability to sit up, so that they are sitting independently, and then also that their tongue thrust is has been stopped. So the tongue thrust is just that very early infant stage where they are sticking out their mouth. This is to make sure that foods that could gag or choke them don't go into their mouth. So once they've stopped doing that and they can sit up well, this is typically the stage where their digestive system has matured as well, and they can start taking other foods that are not milk. And then as far as when finger foods are provided, it's when the child can sit up straight, absolutely. And then they're also starting to use their fingers more. They have more dexterity. They can isolate their thumb and their finger, and they're starting to use that pincer grasp. Another things with our babies and infants is taste, textures, colors, and smells are really important as they're exploring food and eating with others. So this is the age that they're not going to be as resistant to new colors and textures and tastes because everything's new to them. So stick a beet in there, stick in some butternut squash, some jicama, some cucumbers, any types of foods that are going to be new or unusual to them. Everything is, so you might as well expose them to everything. So after I talk about each age group's feeding guidelines, I'm also going to talk about things that you might need to have your staff and caregivers aware of in the classroom when it comes to feeding children. So for our infants, that it's routine based. That's going to be really important, that it's not on a schedule. It's when the child is hungry, they are fed. And then there might also need to be some guidelines on thawing breast milk and then warming milks and formulas safely in bottle warmers. Hand washing procedures, of course, how to prepare formula, when and how to offer solids, and then I've also included something on being breastfeeding friendly within childcare settings. So these are some of the issues that you might need to clarify and talk with your staff about. So when we're feeding toddlers, toddlers, terrible twos, this extends to our feeding times. So the toddler's need for independence, their age-appropriate temper tantrums, all can be translated to mealtime behaviors as well. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that they are neophobic about everything. They have a fear of new or unfamiliar things, and this extends to foods as well. So dining times need to be a mix of independent skill and practice, introducing them to new things and knowing that they're not going to like it. So a lot of times a child needs to try or taste, even with their tongue stuck out, at least 20 times a new food in order to kind of make the decision if they like it or not. So dining time is when we're going to work on independent skill, pouring their own meal, piercing their own chicken nuggets, and then the supervision of those as well to make sure that there's not too much liquid, so if they start pouring and they don't stop, it doesn't go everywhere. The look and texture of food at this age is highly important. This is where food preparation is going to really come into play. If it doesn't look appealing, if there's not different colors, if the texture is funky, a child's going to be much more resistant to trying it. This doesn't mean with textures that you shouldn't only offer like soft foods, because a lot of times children do like crunchy, like chips and crackers and things like that. So having a mix of different textures within the plate is going to be more appealing to them. And then also the look and color of them as well, so that they're not touching, there's greens and reds and blues. That type of stuff will also make toddlers more apt to try new foods. And then I want to touch on Ellen Satter. She's kind of our guru for feeding. I've used her work a lot in providing food for my own children, because really it talks about what the responsibility of the adult is and what the responsibility of the child is. So me as a mother or a preschooler, I'm controlling the food, what is made and what is prepared, and that there's a variety of food that's healthy and nutritious. And I also have a responsibility to control when it's offered. So I tell the child when the mealtime is. And then I'm also modeling quality food choices. So I'm not putting cucumbers down in front of my child and then I'm eating a Big Mac. We are eating the same thing, and I'm modeling how to eat and how to use manners at the table. And then the toddler or child, they get to control which food they choose and how much of it they eat. It has a caveat in children with special needs. This sometimes doesn't work for them, but in those cases you will have guidelines from the family or from oral, motor, or occupational therapists on how to feed the child. But for most typically developing children, these are excellent guidelines for how we feed children and making meal times less of a battleground. So that is one of my twins when she was 2 years old. She had just woken up from a nap and she was enjoying a after nap messy snack outside with one of her friends. So when we're training toddlers, and as you can see, I offered a wide variety of foods and she got to choose how much she ate. So procedures and training for staff, obviously hand washing. Our food safety and our food handling in the classroom, so that might be something you want to go over. And then safe eating practices, because as they're being exposed to a wider variety of foods, so does the choking risk. So hot dogs, grapes, popcorn. What's your policy and your procedures on those types of foods? And what are you going to tell staff about it? And then family style dining, maybe including Satter's work for the guidelines for feeding children, or talking about dexterity of children's hands and how much we would expect them to be able to feed themselves well at this age. And then also how you supervise them having family style dining. So those are some of the things that you might want to talk about with new caregivers or as monthly training for your toddler caregivers as well. So feeding our preschoolers, this is a fairly nice age. They're getting over their fear of the unknown, so they're more apt to try new foods. They do enjoy lukewarm foods at this age. They are very much like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. They want stuff that's not too hot and not too cold. Lukewarm is really best for them. The look and texture and color greatly affect this age. But the biggest thing with our preschoolers is that the peer pressure and what other children and what their teachers are eating really models for the child what they should be eating. And that's why a lot of programs like to do cooking at this age, is it's a good way to expose them within the curriculum to new, healthier food choices because they get to have it be fun, they get to try new things, maybe cutting with butter knives, and then they also have the peer pressure of seeing what other children are doing and trying to mimic it. So for our preschool caregivers, working on procedures and training, once again, safe food handling within the classroom, washing your hands, using gloves, not sneezing into the food, that type of stuff is really important. Making sure that what we provide is safely made and safely handled for the children. And then family style dining. This is where we're really talking about the conversation, the manners, the just sitting down with the children and enjoying having a meal with them, because that's going to be the biggest way that they are going to be enticed in eating new and nutritious foods, is just having a pleasant mealtime experience. So maybe showing the video that I had earlier, or even coming in as a director and modeling with staff or modeling with classrooms that might be struggling with family style dining, and how to provide these welcoming and warm mealtime experiences. Now I'm talking about feeding school-age children. In these slides I'm going to be talking more about our AM and PM programs. So I know sometimes children will be in your program all day long and you'll have to provide lunch, but typically you're providing a morning breakfast and then a fairly substantial afternoon snack. And because they are older and they're eating more at meals, they typically can go longer in between their meals, but we still need to make sure that we are providing enough quality and quantity food, and that's typically within a breakfast and a snack. The nice thing about providing these, and especially our after-school snack, is that it can be longer, and I often did it as a free choice activity. So when my school agers would first come back to school, there are some children that they have been sitting down for so long that they just need to move their body. And so I would have free choice between outdoor play with staff supervising them outside and then staff inside supervising them for a snack. So it went a little bit longer. It went for an hour, and they could independently select from food choices. We kind of had like a bar off to the side, and they could go and they could choose the food that they wanted and sit down, and within that hour they could choose when they wanted to do it. So this allowed the children who were getting out of school and were ravenous for food to sit down and have a snack before they went on to their day. And then also the children who just needed to move their bodies, they could go and move their bodies and then come back down for snack. And this eliminated a lot of the chaos that we had as well, of children who just wanted to move and were bouncing up and down and maybe throwing food. And then they had the children that were just eating. So we were able to split it up, and that always kind of worked well from us. And then independently selecting their own food choices was really nice as well. Sometimes we'd have a salad bar, fruit salad bar, nacho bar, things like that, where they could pick and choose between healthy choices to put on, their salad or their fruit or their nachos or something like that. The great thing about this age group as well is that our cooking activities can be more complex, and then we can satisfy that need for kind of clicking and making social peer groups by having cooking clubs. And this is great because they can read recipes, they can cut with safety knives, and then cooking clubs are becoming more popular as well, kind of as healthy life skills are promoted within our society. I can think San Marcos, I believe, at an after-school program that they have within their school district, they have a cooking club, I think, on 1 day a week or 2 days a week, where children go for 2 hours and they chop and mix and saute and kind of learn about healthy foods. So it's something that's being promoted within our society, and something that maybe if you don't have, that's not something that you can officially do, you can always bring it into the curriculum as a club or just curriculum ideas. So training our school age staff, and once again, it's going to be a little bit repetitive in that hand washing and food safety are still highly important even for this age. And then the hand washing of the children as they enter the program from the elementary school is highly important. They have been around all day. The aides and duties are not watching them to make sure if they wash their hands. So they need to wash their hands when they enter the program, then they need to wash their hands before they have meals. And we often think that because they're older and they have a lot more complex motor skills, and socially and emotionally they can be more responsible, that we can get lax on this. We can't. Hand washing needs to be a really important part of our program. And then the policy that I would think would probably be for how you're going to provide snacks and meal times, as far as family style dining. So is it all going to be together? Is it going to be split up between children who need to play? Is it going to be a free choice activity? Can it be longer? Is it shorter? How are you going to provide the policy within your program? And how are you going to make sure that children are offered a variety of healthy food choices after school or maybe before school during breakfast? So then we're talking about feeding our mixed age, and this would be really for our FCC providers. So kind of the challenges of this is if you have a wide variety of ages, infants and up, an infant is going to be routine-based. They eat when they eat when they're hungry. And then older children are going to need to have scheduled times in which snacks and meal times are provided. And then as if you have infants and you also have toddlers, you need to make sure that you're providing safe food choices for an infant, while also providing variety for older children. So, if you're serving hot dogs and grapes, what are the safety requirements that you have for infants if they're also in your care? What if they were to swipe, a 9-month-old was going to swipe a hot dog, something like that. And then the strengths of this program as well is there's a lot of peer modeling of healthy food choices by the older children, and that's fantastic. Our preschoolers are looking at what the school agers are doing, or our toddlers who are afraid of anything new are looking at our preschoolers and saying, ooh, wow, like eating a piece of jicama isn't going to kill me. It's also a home-like setting, so using family-style dining really makes sense in this setting because you are at home. And then also the older children often are encouraged to be cooperative or have patience. Or use their manners because there's a wide variety of ages, and so the older children can need to be more patient and cooperative with the little ones. So kind of meeting the needs of the challenges, I used Dodge and Trister's creative curriculum for some of this, and then some of the information from health, safety, and nutrition, and also things that I've seen at FCC providers as well. So obviously prepping food before the families arrive, and then also during nap times, so that you're not sitting there, chopping carrots for a salad when an infant needs to have a bottle. I've seen a lot of programs where they'll have parents bring in lunches and then they only provide snacks that are easy to serve, something you can grab out. You've already prepped for the day. You can just put it down and serve it family style dining. Or in other programs, the parents bring it on Tuesday, Thursdays, and you provide meals Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and costs are provided for in tuition. Typically with these, you're using cyclic menus, so things that repeat over and over again. So you only have a couple of choices and you repeat them over so that they're easy to prepare for you, not a lot of prep time, and then something that the children can serve easily within family style dining. And then meal times, maybe providing toys for toddlers or preschoolers who finish early so that the whole group can stay at a table. If it's in a different part of the house or it's outside and you still need to provide supervision for the entire group, maybe specific mealtime toys, coloring, cars, things like that children who finish early can play with while they're waiting for the rest of the group. And then in another program that I saw, she really brought into her curriculum the idea of helping to set up and clean up. So she would sanitize the table, but at the end, the children would kind of put their plastic dishes into a plastic bin, and there were like 4 or 5 of them. So then the helper for the day would then take that into the kitchen. And then at the very end, they would all grab wipes and they would wipe the table. And for our toddlers and our preschoolers, being brought into that type of household chores can be really rewarding for them. And then afterwards, she sanitized it for real. But it was something to encourage them to kind of bust their own tables. It was a self-help skill that really encouraged confidence in the younger children. So I'm going to put on my early interventionist hat, the part of me that works with children with special needs, and I'm going to just talk about some special issues related to feeding children. So identifying oral motor difficulties early on and referring them to the pediatrician is going to be really key. So if you're noticing that children are choking or gagging frequently, they're chipmunking food, and what I mean by that is they're eating food and they're pushing it off to the side, like in their cheek, or they're having difficulty swallowing, especially for infants. If this seems to be happening, they need to see a pediatrician who then might also look for an evaluation from an OT, an occupational therapist. Typically in California and San Diego County, occupational therapists handle the oral motor difficulties. Some speech therapists might, but typically it's an occupational therapist. Children with special needs are also going to have different needs for eating. So depending on maybe a genetic condition or what their muscle tone is, if it's very low and they're floppy, or it's very high because they have cerebral palsy and their muscles are very tight and spastic, that might contribute to some eating difficulties as well. And they're going to need more support, physical support and behavioral support. So for example, a child with Down syndrome is also often called floppy because they have very low muscle tone. That's something that they're going to have the rest of their life. So typically, they're also going to have their their tongue thrust, and that's going to go on for quite a while as well. So purees might be delayed for quite a while. And when they are eating, if they are not sitting independently, they need typically more trunk support from specially designed chairs in order to eat. And even into toddlerhood, they'll need chairs. In a lot of our programs, our children sit at chairs and maybe their feet dangle a little bit, like they're not firmly on the floor. Children with low muscle tone need to sit at chairs where they have their feet on the floor or on a block, because this provides them support for their whole body. So when their hips and their knees and their legs are all supported and at 90-degree angles, this gives them more support in order to sit up straight and use their oral motor skills. And then behaviorally, they often throw plates, maybe because they don't have the language skills to say all done, so they'll flip a plate, or behavioral issues that, actually eating, using a spoon, piercing something, even into preschool age can be very difficult for somebody with low muscle tone or Down syndrome, and that frustration will come out as flipping plates, or whatever food they have. So often mats are provided, or those sticky bowls that they can't flip up. But this, once again, is something where you're going to get guidelines and information and support from the family, and then maybe from therapists who come to the classroom as well to train you. Then I want to touch a little bit on sensory issues. So this is textures typically, or it can be tastes that are going to be difficult for some children to handle. A lot of times sensory issues are comorbid with autism. So that means that you see sensitivities to textures and foods, light, sound, all of our 5 senses is often prevalent within our autistic community. That doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but sometimes you will see this. So if their sensory issues are impacting their ability to eat or to kind of socially play, then you can also refer to a pediatrician who then might seek out an occupational therapist. An occupational therapist, in addition to doing oral motor, fine motor, some of them have also been trained in sensory issues and sensory integration and can help children make accommodations or set up meal times for them to be successful in dealing with tastes and textures. So if you notice a child's only eating certain types of food, like they only want crunchy or they only want soft, and it's becoming an issue with their eating, or it's becoming an issue with how they play with others and how they touch things, then you might want to talk to the parents about it. And then within the foster care, and then children who have a past of being abused and neglected, they can have some food scarcity issues. So taking away or limiting of food can be difficult. We can never remove food as a punishment or a consequence for any child, but for some of the children that I've worked with who didn't have or a wide variety of food or had it removed from them as a consequence, they can have a lot of behavioral issues around food. Some children just being done with food, even if their hunger cues are sated, they've been met, they still need to kind of have food within their sight or on their plate because that makes them feel comfortable and makes them feel that their needs are being provided for. So in these kinds of cases, these are challenging behaviors and probably seen in other areas of the classroom, and you're going to need to talk with the foster parents or if they've been reunified with their biological family about ways that you can meet their needs when it comes to the emotional aspect of food. And then finally, there's G-tubes, J-tubes, and NG-tubes. So a G-tube is a tube that goes straight into the stomach. A J-tube goes into the intestine, and then an NG-tube is the most visible, and that's like a very long tube that is typically clipped at the back of their shirt and then winds around and goes up into their nose. And this is all ways of getting liquids, nutrition into a child who cannot eat or swallow. So if you have a child who has any of these tubes, there are lots of trainings available for staff who need to provide these tube food feedings. Typically, you can have a nurse come out and they will train the entire staff in hand washing, how to provide formula, how to get it into the tube. The first time I worked with a child with a G-tube, I was quite hesitant about it. As a play-based therapist, knowing that we were going to be rolling and working on crawling, how was that going to impact the G-tube? And then the first time seeing her eat was a revelation as well. just kind of, at that point it was formula, but then it became more blended foods. So going to a training really helped me with this, knowing that the G tube and the NG tubes can be put back in by the parents very easily. It's quite hard for a G tube to pop out. NG tubes can be removed for the child, but typically if they're attending a program and they have one, they've had it for quite a while and they're used to it. It's just basically an inconvenience at that point. So if you're going to have a child like this enter into your program, don't be afraid, just seek out further training and education. So the online assignment is, we're going to be talking about food policy. So I've put a bunch of different options for infants, preschoolers, school age, or mixed age up on the assignment part of Canvas, and you're going to choose one. So only pick one based on who you're working with now, who you'd like to work with in the future, or what type of program you have now or would like to open in the future. So you're going to write the policy for this and not the procedure. So you're more discussing the importance of meeting certain age groups' needs, but the exact specifications or how it's carried out would be in a more detailed procedure or training module, or just in something like that. So for example, my policy about feeding infants would talk about routines, that we believe in routine-based care. When children are hungry, they are fed. I would talk about encouraging breastfeeding relationship, but also emphasize that the most important thing is that children are fed. Then I would talk about providing social and emotional support for the children as they're eating, and that having a calm, caring caregiver providing their meals or the purees is the most important thing when feeding. And then I might touch on the importance of hand washing and when they would wash their hands, but I wouldn't specifically give the steps for hand washing, and I wouldn't specifically talk about bottle making. I would just say that we feed children bottles by holding them in their hands, holding them in our hands, and rocking them or holding them. So you don't need to write out the procedure about, let's say, thawing breast milk, because that would be in a handbook or procedure. We're just talking about feeding infants and how we should be feeding infants within the classroom. So what is community care licensing requirements for food and for food safety? So they need to make sure that our food prep is both safe and healthful, that the quality and quantity of food, that there's enough of it to meet the needs of children. They want to make sure that between meals, snacks are served and that 2 out of the 4 food groups are provided. Menus should be written and posted 1 week in advance. Pesticides, toxic substances, soaps, cleaning materials are not stored with food storage. The kitchen area is clean. So we've sanitized our food prep services. We don't have wooden cutting boards, and that we're protecting foods against cross-contamination. So once again, our cutting boards that are used for meat are not used for vegetables. And then the equipment that we need to have is a fridge, a sink, a hot and cold water, and storage. So it's not an oven, but you just need to have things to store and to prep food. So I got a violation with licensing, and it's my only violation, and it was actually for food. I talked previously about checking for labels, and we checked the labels of our juice, and it was no longer 100%. So I took it out of rotation and I bought 100% juice, so I was in compliance with that. In our food storage pantry, we had all of our children's food and we had our staff food, because we typically had potlucks twice a month. So we had a shelf for staff food, and our taco shells and our cookies and stuff like that all said office on them, or staff, something like that, to indicate that you shouldn't be serving, a bunch of cookies to the toddlers. And I stuck the juice on that shelf. I got an annual inspection by our community care licensing analyst, who's very thorough, and she went through and she saw that the juice was next to the adult food and far away from the child care food, but it hadn't been labeled, and so I got a violation. I'm still a little bit upset about it. It's been over a decade. I thought that it was clear because it was with the staff food, which was far away from the children's food. But I can see her point in that it wasn't adequately labeled, and somebody could have given the children a 50% fruit juice instead of a 100%. So you need to be very detail oriented. You need to do things like first in, first out. So when you're putting milk in, making sure that you're using the milk that you already have before serving the newest milk that you've got. Most of you will have your food service and your food handling provided by cooks who have a food handler's permit, or they're provided by cafeterias or places off-site and are delivered to you, and that's fantastic. You don't need to be involved in the day-to-day. You should still be involved in overseeing that, because if there is a licensing violation, that's going to come down to you because you are the director and you are ultimately responsible for everything that happens in that center. So you should know the bare bones of it so that you can make sure that your staff as cooks are taking care of that for you. If you're a smaller program, you are going to need to go to the licensing website, and I've put one of the food links for you so that you can look in detail about how you prep safely, and then how you handle safely, how you cook safely, and then how you serve it to children safely. Found this video. They're called Culinary Videos for Childcare series. And in addition to recipes, she also provides really important information about food handling, safe prep work, sanitation, hand washing. So I highly recommend that you watch this. The one that I've put here is about preparing meat, and that's an issue with cross-contamination, meat juices, raw meat, raw chickens, source of a salmonella. So making sure that you are prepared for not cross-contaminating is going to be really important. So these culinary videos, if you are cooking for your program or you're a smaller program who doesn't have a cook, this would be very important for you to watch. Or if you're just a director and you'd like to know a little bit more so that you can offer more support and more supervision to your cooking staff, please watch it. There are some yearly training as well that I want to talk on. For our cooks, that's their food handler's permit. And then for our FCC families, there's health and sanitation trainings that you have to do. And then for the food program participants, there's also certain hours of training that you need to complete. So in conclusion, it's our responsibility to provide safely prepared and high quality nutritious meals for all of the children in our care. And we're really supporting healthy life skills by making nutritious foods appealing and then inviting them to partake in it with us through really warm interactions in family style dining. And then each age, ability, and level has their own feeding needs, and knowing what those developmentally appropriate age levels are and meeting their needs then is highly important as well.